All right, let's jump into this deep dive. We're tackling the Book of Judges today.
Oh, yeah.
A book packed with, well,
It's a wild ride.
wild is a good word for it. It's got those amazing stories of, courage and faith, but also some tough choices.
Right, like real tough choices.
And that whole back and forth between, being faithful and then straying and temptation. It's something, isn't it?
It really is. And it still speaks to us, even thousands of years later.
Oh, absolutely. It makes you wonder, what can we learn from all of that?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, exactly. So the Book of Judges, it basically picks up after Joshua dies, right?
That's right.
And the Israelites, they're starting to settle into the Promised Land.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't exactly go smoothly.
Oh, no, not at all. They kind of keep going in circles.
Very much so. It's
Yeah.
like this constant cycle of they turn away from God, things go bad, they cry out for help, God sends a judge to rescue them.
And then they do it all again.
It's the classic rinse and repeat.
You'd think they'd learn after the first time, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. But I guess that's human nature for you. Even today, we see that pattern, don't we? We stray from our values, things go wrong, and then we try to find our way back.
It's like that feeling when you hit a big goal, right? Like you finally get into that dream college or land the perfect job, and then you kind of relax a little too much.
Totally. You forget all the hard work and discipline that got you there.
And bam, you're right back where you started. It's like the Israelites. They conquer the Promised Land, and then they kind of forget what it took to get there.
Exactly. And the consequences, well, they're not pretty.
No, not pretty at all. So let's dive into some of these judges, because each one is so unique.
Oh, they are characters, that's for sure.
We've got, almost superhero-level judges, and then some who are, well, let's just say they're complicated.
Yeah, complicated is a good word.
First up is Othniel.
Ah, Othniel, our very first judge.
He's kind of like the prototype, right?
Yeah.
Sets the stage for this whole cycle of deliverance we see throughout the book.
Exactly. After 8 years of oppression under Cushan-Rishathaim, the Mesopotamian king.
8 years, that's a long time.
It is. And Othniel, well, he steps up. He leads the Israelites to victory.
Yeah, bam. 40 years of peace.
40 years. You'd think that would be enough, right? To solidify their faith, to stay on the right path.
You would think. But no. As we see in Judges 3, they slip back into old habits.
Ah, yes. The old habits die hard.
This time it's King Eglon of Moab causing all the trouble.
King Eglon, a memorable character, to say the least.
And that's where we meet Ehud.
Ehud, a left-handed warrior.
Left-handed, which, that's important later.
Very important to the story. He's a crafty one, that Ehud.
He's got this plan, right? He's got to deliver tribute to King Eglon.
Mm-hmm. But he's also got a hidden weapon.
A double-edged dagger strapped to his right thigh.
See? Left-handed. It matters.
Now, Eglon, he's described as a very fat man.
Yes. The text doesn't shy away from the details.
And Ehud, he uses that to his advantage.
Oh, he does.
He goes to Eglon and says, "Hey, I've got a secret message for you."
Can you imagine being in that room? The tension must have been palpable.
Seriously. And Eglon, all curious and probably a bit too full of himself, sends his servants away.
Big mistake.
So there they are, alone in the private chamber.
And that's when Ehud makes his move.
Bam. He plunges the dagger right into Eglon's belly.
Judges 3.22 says, "The fat closed upon the blade." Talk about a vivid description.
Oh, it's a little gruesome, isn't it?
It is, but effective.
And Ehud, he gets away while Eglon's servants are just waiting outside thinking.
They probably assumed he was taking care of, other business.
Right. Too embarrassed to interrupt.
Gives Ehud plenty of time to escape and rally the Israelites.
And his unconventional tactic leads to 80 years of peace.
80 years. That's even longer than the peace Othniel brought.
You'd really think they'd learn their lesson this time, right?
You'd hope so. But alas, the cycle continues. It's a reminder that even when things seem good, we can't let our guard down.
It's like a constant check-in, Are we staying true to our values? Or are we letting things slide?
Exactly. It's a question we all need to ask ourselves regularly.
So next up, we've got Deborah. Now she's a trailblazer.
Absolutely. A prophetess, a leader, and the only female judge in the entire book.
I mean, talk about breaking barriers. What's your take on Deborah's role in all of this?
Well, it's incredibly empowering, isn't it? She's a woman in a male-dominated society, but she leads with such wisdom, courage, and spiritual authority.
You have to imagine what it was like for Barak, being told by a woman that God has chosen him to lead the army against the Canaanites.
Yeah, that must have been a humbling experience.
Judges 4.6 tells us Deborah summoned him, delivered God's command. But Barak, maybe feeling a bit inadequate, insists that Deborah go with him to the battle.
It's interesting, isn't it? He recognizes her spiritual authority, relies on her guidance, even though he's the one officially leading the army.
It's like he knows he needs her there.
He does, and Deborah agrees, but she prophesies that the ultimate victory will belong to a woman.
Foreshadowing. And boy, does that prophecy come true.
It does indeed. In a way no one could have predicted.
The battle is fierce, but it's not a soldier who takes down Sisera, the Canaanite commander.
No, it's Jael.
Jael, the wife of a Kenite chieftain,
Lures Sisera into her tent, offers him milk, and while he's sleeping...
drives a tent peg through his temple.
Talk about a plot twist.
Oh, it's wild. And Deborah's victory song in Judges 5, it's one of the most powerful passages in the whole book.
It really is. A song of praise, celebration, but also a reminder of the cost of freedom.
And the consequences of disobedience.
Exactly.
It gives me chills every time I read it.
It's hard not to be moved by it.
So we've got these incredible judges, these cycles of sin and redemption.
It makes you wonder what's coming next, doesn't it?
It does. But we'll have to say that for part 2 of our deep dive into the book of Judges.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Judges. We've been exploring those cycles of, well, sin and redemption.
They really keep repeating, don't they? It's like you see
Isn't it?
the pattern,
It's hard to miss.
but then they just, I don't know, they fall back into those old habits.
It's human nature, I guess.
I guess so. Makes you wonder if we do the same thing, in our own lives.
Absolutely. It's like watching a friend make the same mistake over and over again. You just want to say, hey, don't you see what's happening?
Totally. But maybe we're not so different from those Israelites, right? We all have those moments of weakness.
Oh, for sure. We're all human.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Judges so relatable, I think. It holds up a mirror to our own struggles with faith and temptation.
It does. So speaking of temptation, let's talk about Gideon. Now, he's an interesting one.
Oh, yeah. Gideon's a fascinating character. Starts out feeling anything but chosen.
Remember when he's hiding in that wine press?
Yeah.
Threshing wheat, and then bam! An angel appears and calls him a mighty man of valor.
Right. I mean, can you imagine? You're hiding from the Midianites. You're feeling pretty low.
And then an angel shows up and says, "You're the mighty warrior."
I think I'd be questioning that angel's eyesight.
Totally. And Gideon does too. Judges 6.15 tells us he's from a humble family, like the least in Manasseh.
He's full of self-doubt.
Oh, yeah. Wondering why God would even pick him. I bet a lot of us can relate to that feeling, right?
Absolutely. That feeling of I'm not good enough or why me, it's pretty universal.
So Gideon, he asks for a sign, the famous fleece test.
The fleece. Classic Gideon.
He wants proof, right, that God's really with him.
And God, being incredibly patient, provides it. Not just once, but twice.
2 fleeces. Talk about going the extra mile.
Right. First, a wet fleece on dry ground, then the opposite, dry fleece on wet ground.
It's like God saying, okay, Gideon, you need a little reassurance. Here it is.
It's a beautiful illustration of God meeting us where we are.
Totally. Okay, so Gideon's faith gets a boost. He's ready to take on the Midianites. But then there's a twist.
Oh yeah, here comes the twist.
God tells him his army's too big.
Too big, can you imagine that?
Seriously. You're about to go into battle and God's like, nope, too many people.
It's a lesson in humility, isn't it? And trust.
God wants the victory to be clearly his doing, not human strength.
Exactly. So the army gets whittled down from 32,000 men to just 300.
300. Against an army described as lying along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude.
Talk about an underdog story.
I'd be freaking out. 300 guys against that. No thanks.
But Gideon, he trusts God. He goes forward with this, well, unusual battle plan.
Trumpets, torches hidden in pitchers, lots of noise. Sounds more like a party than a war.
Right. But it works. Picture this. The Midianites, sound asleep in their camp, suddenly they're surrounded.
These 300 Israelites are smashing their pitches, blowing their trumpets, shouting, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon!"
Chaos erupts. The Midianites, completely startled, they start attacking each other in the dark.
They have no idea what's hit them.
It's brilliant. A total victory, orchestrated by God.
A reminder that with God, even the impossible is possible.
Absolutely. But even after this amazing victory, Gideon, he kind of stumbles.
Yeah, the ephod, right. He makes this priestly garment from the spoils of war, and it becomes, well, an idol for the Israelites.
A reminder that even after experiencing God's power, we can still fall prey to idolatry.
It's like anything can become an idol, right? Possessions, status, even a good cause.
If it takes the place of God in our hearts, it's an idol.
Gideon's story is a good reminder to keep our priorities in check. God first, always.
Agreed. Okay, ready for Samson.
Oh, Samson. He's like larger than life.
Superhuman strength, incredible feats, and a weakness for dangerous women.
The classic tragic hero, right? But his story, it really highlights God's mercy and grace.
It does. He's given this extraordinary strength, but there's a condition.
The Nazirite vow,
He can't cut his hair.
the hair, it's like his power source.
A physical symbol of his covenant with God.
And he uses that strength to do some pretty amazing things.
Kills a lion with his bare hands.
Oh, and remember the foxes and torches? He sets fire to the Philistine fields.
Don't forget the jawbone of a donkey. Takes out 1,000 Philistines with that.
Talk about a one-man army. But yeah, his downfall, it starts with his attraction to Philistine women.
First his wife, then Delilah.
Oh, Delilah. Now she's a piece of work.
A master manipulator.
She just plays Samson, uses his feelings against him.
Judges 16.16 tells us she pressed him daily with her words until his soul was vexed unto death.
It's kind of sad, actually, how temptation can just wear us down.
It's a struggle we all face.
And Samson, he finally cracks. Tells her the secret of his strength. His hair.
And Delilah, she seizes the opportunity.
Shaves his head while he's sleeping, calls on the Philistines, and boom, Samson's strength is gone.
Just like that. It's heartbreaking.
The Philistines capture him, gouge out his eyes, make him grind grain in prison.
It's brutal.
A stark reminder that even those with incredible gifts can fall.
But even in captivity, God doesn't abandon Samson.
His hair starts to grow back.
A symbol of renewal, of his connection with God being restored.
And then, the final act.
At a Philistine festival, no less.
They're celebrating their god Dagon, and they bring Samson out for entertainment.
They think they've broken him, but, oh, they're wrong.
Samson, he's placed between two pillars that hold up the whole temple.
And he prays for strength.
One last time.
To avenge himself on the Philistines.
With a mighty roar, he pushes against those pillars, and the whole temple comes crashing down.
The dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Judges 16.30 tells us.
It's tragic, but also kind of epic.
It is. Samson's story is full of highs and lows.
Oh.
But ultimately, it's a message of hope and redemption.
Even in our failures, God can still use us.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into Judges, there are some darker episodes we need to explore.
Oh, yeah. The stories that are a bit tougher to digest.
But they're important, too. They remind us of the consequences of sin, of the depths of human depravity.
And they offer some crucial lessons. So stick with us as we delve into those challenging accounts in part 3. All right, we're back. Diving into some of the more challenging parts of Judges.
Yeah, this is where things get a little darker.
It's not always easy to read, right? But these stories, they're in there for a reason.
They really highlight the consequences of unchecked sin, I guess you could say.
And the depths of human depravity.
Yeah. But even in these tough passages, there are still lessons to be learned.
Oh, definitely. Reminders of God's justice, his mercy.
Mm-hmm. So one of the most disturbing accounts, it's in Judges 19.
The Levite and his concubine.
It's a story about, hospitality gone wrong, mob violence.
A complete breakdown of, societal norms.
And it takes place during a time when, remember, no king in Israel.
Right. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. We've seen that line before.
And it never leads to anything good.
So this Levite and his concubine, they're traveling, looking for a place to stay for the night.
They end up in Gibeah, a Benjamite town.
And they're met with, not exactly a warm welcome.
It's more like indifference, hostility even.
Which is the opposite of how God's people are supposed to act, right?
Totally. Hospitality is a huge part of their culture, their faith.
So it's a sign that something's off, right? Something's wrong in Gibeah.
Definitely. They're just sitting there in the city square. Nobody's offering them shelter.
Until finally, this old man.
Who's originally from Ephraim?
He takes them in.
But their safety, it doesn't last long.
A mob shows up, surrounds the house, demands the Levite be brought out to them.
They're called sons of Belial.
Which, that's not a good sign. It's associated with wickedness, lawlessness.
Like a real echo of the depravity that led to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Heavy stuff. The old man, he tries to reason with the mob, offers his own daughter.
And the Levite's concubine.
Desperate attempt to protect his guest.
But the mob, they're not having it. Driven by lust and violence.
It's awful. The Levite, he does something, misguided.
Sends his concubine out to the mob.
Trying to protect himself, I guess. But she's abused all night and found dead the next morning.
It's horrific. And it triggers this chain reaction.
Leads to almost the whole tribe of Benjamin being wiped out.
The Levite, he's driven by grief, rage. He sends messengers throughout Israel.
With the body of his concubine as proof of what happened.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly violence can escalate.
Out of control.
And the other tribes, they're outraged. They gather to fight Benjamin.
The battles are bloody, brutal, huge losses on both sides.
It's a tragic illustration of what happens when sin is left unchecked.
We also see that moral decay in the story of Micah.
Oh, Micah, the guy who creates his own idols.
Hires a Levite to be his personal priest.
Like a complete rejection of God's commands.
In Micah's story, it's like a perfect example of the spiritual confusion that's going on.
Moral relativism, people doing whatever they want.
Because, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes.
Right. And look where it leads them.
Not a good place. These darker stories, they're tough to read, but they're warnings, aren't they?
For sure. They remind us to stay vigilant, to fight against temptation.
To uphold justice, righteousness.
And to trust God's guidance, not our own flawed judgment.
Because our judgment, it can lead us down some pretty dark paths.
Judges, it's this roller coaster of triumphs and tragedies, but it ultimately points to the need for a righteous king.
Someone to unite the nation, guide them back to God.
It sets the stage for the next chapter in Israel's history, really. The rise of the monarchy.
Which, well, that's a whole other deep dive.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Judges,
what are your takeaways? What stories stuck with you?
what warnings can we heed from the mistakes of the Israelites?
And how can we apply those lessons to our own lives today? Because that's what it's all about, right?
It is learning from the past, walking in righteousness,
Seeking God's guidance.
every step of the way.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Judges.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But hopefully a thought-provoking one, too.